I'm Ryan, 33 years old, a guy who's been patient a little too long. When I started at this company, fresh and eager, I believed in mentorship and teamwork. I believed in professionalism. But I quickly learned some battles are fought not with code or keyboards, but with whispers, slights, and sabotage. Mark was supposed to be my mentor. Instead, he became my tormentor. The first time he yelled at me in front of the team, I froze. The sting of humiliation burned deep, but I told myself to hold steady. That was just the beginning. Every day since, Mark made sure I knew I was an outsider, a nobody trying to play with the big boys. His insults were sharp, public, relentless. And when he wasn't shouting, he was weaving poisonous rumors that spread faster than wildfire. I kept a diary, not just for me, but for proof. Proof that my patience was not weakness, but endurance. Months passed, and the company's biggest project began, a massive undertaking involving thousands. I was the only one in my role, standing alone against the storm. Sarah, the project manager, was supposed to steer us through the chaos. Instead, she was the storm's eye, calm and cold, but deadly. From the start, her actions were undermining. Meetings where I was interrupted, tasks unjustly piled on my plate, whispers spread about my incompetence. No one questioned her. Her boss never intervened. I was drowning. Late nights, trying to salvage my reputation, my sanity, fighting delays caused by impossible demands, watching colleagues hesitate to support me, too afraid to cross her. One morning, after a particularly brutal meeting where Mark humiliated me again, something inside snapped. My anger flared hotter than ever before. I threatened him, and in that moment, I saw the raw truth. I couldn't fight him head-on. Not yet. Not in this city. Not in this company. So I fought smarter. I pulled out my diary. I crafted an email, precise, detailed, and just spicy enough to make waves. I flagged Mark's behavior, Sarah's manipulation, even hinted at illegal moves Mark might be making. I was ready to play their game on my terms. The war was just beginning. After sending that email, I thought things might finally change. Maybe someone would see the truth. Maybe justice would be served. I was wrong. What happened instead was the coldest kind of war, the one fought in whispers and sideways glances. HR responded with an investigation. They asked questions, took statements, but they didn't act fast enough, and by the time I returned to work, the office atmosphere was thick with suspicion. Sarah doubled down. Every time I spoke, she interrupted. Every task I refused was labeled as failure. And Mark? He smirked like I'd just handed him a weapon. The project grew heavier, deadlines loomed, pressure mounted. I was alone on an island, surrounded by sharks. One morning, on a video call, Mark lost it. Without warning, he shouted and cursed me in front of half the team. That moment shattered whatever calm I had left. I wanted to lash out, to scream back, but I knew it would only play into their hands. Instead, I did something different. I held my ground, promised myself that the next move would be mine, calculated and final. Meanwhile, I kept collecting evidence. Emails, messages, notes from colleagues who had started to see through Sarah's schemes. Slowly, allies emerged, but they were cautious. Fear ruled the room. The breaking point came 3 months in. Sarah's power trip blew up spectacularly during a project review with senior management. She bungled her presentation and was called out. After that, she began shifting every blame and responsibility onto me, flooding inboxes with accusations and demands. I requested to be removed from the project. They refused. So I made my move. I went to the legal office with everything I had, my diary, emails, recordings, witnesses. I accused Mark of illegal behavior. I knew it was risky, but it was the only way to force action. And then, like lightning, news broke. Another scandal erupted in the company involving someone doing the same illegal actions I suspected Mark of. Suddenly, my claims couldn't be ignored. HR and legal launched a full investigation. Mark wasn't fired, but the evidence piled up. The company couldn't publicly admit fault without risking itself, but I knew the truth. The man who tormented me was finally cornered. Sarah resigned shortly after, claiming personal reasons, though everyone knew the real story. The war was far from over, but I had scored my first victories. I was ready for the fight ahead. The aftermath of Sarah's resignation should have brought relief. Instead, it only sharpened the edges of the war. Mark was still there, lurking in the background like a storm waiting to unleash. The investigations had exposed cracks, but he wasn't done yet. If anything, he grew more dangerous, more cunning. Every day at work became a chess match. I was always 2 moves ahead, or at least trying to be. The company installed new oversight measures, but they were slow, cumbersome, and often ineffective. Sarah's departure left a power vacuum that many scrambled to fill. And Mark? He saw opportunity where others saw chaos. Colleagues whispered behind closed doors, and I caught more than a few wary glances. Some offered quiet support, but fear ruled their tongues. I couldn't blame them. The pressure mounted. Deadlines didn't wait for investigations. Projects didn't pause for office politics, and I had to keep delivering. Some nights, I'd lie awake, the weight of exhaustion pressing down on me. My mind raced through emails, meetings, conversations, replaying moments when I lost control or hesitated. The memories of Mark's insults, the isolation, the betrayal, they lingered like scars beneath the surface. But beneath the fatigue was a fire. A relentless drive to prove I was more than their whispers, more than the targets they'd tried to make me. I started pushing harder, taking on more responsibility, showing leadership where I could. Slowly, people began to notice. Respect replaced doubt in some corners. But the victories were small, fragile. One afternoon, I was called into a meeting with senior management. The air was tense, their expressions unreadable. They laid out an ultimatum. I could stay, but only if I toned down the accusations and stopped rocking the boat. They wanted peace, stability, and no more scandals. I realized then that this fight wasn't just against Mark or Sarah. It was against a system built to protect itself. I left the meeting with a choice: compromise my values or risk everything. That night, I sat alone in my apartment, staring at my computer screen. I knew the war was far from over, and I wasn't ready to surrender. The meeting with senior management was supposed to be just another checkpoint in this grueling saga. Instead, it felt like standing at the edge of a cliff, the ground crumbling beneath my feet. Their message was painfully clear: tone it down or risk losing everything. Back down. Stop rocking the boat. Keep the peace. It wasn't just a warning, it was an ultimatum. I left the room with that bitter taste stuck in my mouth, feeling smaller somehow. Like a tiny voice in a room full of echoes telling me to shut up. The very people who were supposed to protect the integrity of the company were asking me to sacrifice my truth for their convenience. But truth was my only weapon. For months, I had been patient, enduring Mark's insults, Sarah's sabotage, and the slow erosion of my confidence. But patience was a limited resource, and mine had finally run dry. That night, in the quiet of my apartment, I stared at my laptop's glowing screen and realized something. The war wasn't just about surviving anymore. It was about winning. I needed allies. I began reaching out, discreetly, carefully, to coworkers who had witnessed the toxicity but were too afraid or uncertain to speak up. There were more than I expected. Faces I'd passed in the hallways, nodding quietly during tense meetings, whispered frustrations shared in empty break rooms. Together, we started piecing together a map of the broken system. The favoritism, the cover-ups, the fear that ruled the office like a silent tyrant. Documentation was key. Emails, meeting recordings, project reports, whispered testimonies. Every day, my dual life grew more complicated. During the day, I was the consummate professional, meeting deadlines, presenting polished reports, answering emails with precision. But after hours, I was a strategist, a quiet warrior, building a case against those who sought to destroy me. Mark's shadow hung heavy over every interaction. His passive-aggressive comments, his cutting remarks disguised as jokes, the way he subtly discredited my work in front of others, all calculated to break me down piece by piece. But I was changing too. I wasn't just fighting to protect myself anymore. I was fighting to reclaim my dignity, to expose the rot that threatened to drag everyone down. One night, after an especially long day filled with petty attacks and microaggressions, I sat in the darkened office, nursing a cold cup of coffee. My phone buzzed. A message from HR. They wanted to meet privately tomorrow morning. My heart thundered. Was this the breakthrough I'd been waiting for? Or the final trap? Sleep was impossible. My mind raced through every conversation, every email, every whispered threat. I rehearsed what I'd say, how I'd hold my ground. The next morning arrived too fast. I walked into the HR office, trying to steady my breath, control the pounding in my chest. The room was small, sterile, a place where careers could be made or destroyed with a few carefully chosen words. They started with the usual questions. Details about the incidents, the emails, the people involved. I answered calmly, clearly, no exaggerations, no omissions. Then came the real test. They asked if I was prepared to tone down my complaints for the sake of the company's image. A pit opened in my stomach. But I refused. I told them no. That silence was complicity. That turning a blind eye would only allow the toxic behavior to fester. The HR reps exchanged looks, uncomfortable, conflicted. It was clear I was pushing boundaries, but I held firm. Walking out of that meeting, I knew the line had been crossed. I had made enemies, powerful ones. But I had also made a choice, to fight, not just for myself, but for everyone who had been silenced. The road ahead was uncertain. The stakes were higher than ever. But for the first time in a long time, I felt alive and ready. The days after that meeting felt like walking on a tightrope stretched over a pit of fire. Every step was measured, every word weighed. I was no longer just a man fighting his tormentors. I was a target. The office, once just a place of work, had transformed into a battleground. I could feel eyes on me wherever I went. Some were curious, some were wary. Most, however, were cold. The warmth of allies felt distant, like fragile embers in a storm. Mark's smirks became more frequent, more venomous. His whispered comments didn't need to be loud. They carried enough poison to infect the entire room. Sarah was gone, but her shadow lingered. The project's chaos still reflected on me, the one she'd tried to bury. I threw myself into the work, desperate to prove that I wasn't the problem. Every project milestone was a brick in the wall I was building around my reputation. Late nights blurred into early mornings. Coffee was my only companion, but the fatigue was relentless. More than once, I caught myself staring blankly at the screen, fingers poised but mind elsewhere, replaying moments when I'd almost broken, when I'd wanted to scream or give up. And yet I couldn't, because giving up meant letting them win. Letting the system swallow me whole. The support network I'd started building grew slowly. Small victories were shared quietly. A colleague backing me up in a meeting, a manager taking note of my work, a whispered, "I believe you," from someone I barely knew. But the company was a machine designed to protect itself. Bureaucracy slowed progress, complaints stalled. The deeper the investigation went, the more resistant the walls became. One afternoon, an unexpected call came from the legal department. They wanted to discuss the ongoing investigation into Mark. A flicker of hope sparked. The evidence I'd gathered was being taken seriously. But with hope came risk. Mark's behavior escalated. His attacks turned subtle but sharp. An email sent just after hours, a rumor planted with just the right amount of truth, a missed deadline conveniently pinned on me. I found myself questioning every interaction. Was that glance hostile? Was that email a trap? Paranoia crept in. I began documenting everything again, more meticulously than before. Every incident logged with timestamps, screenshots, witness accounts. Sometimes, late at night, I felt utterly alone. But I wasn't, because the fight was bigger than me now. It was for anyone who'd ever been bullied, undermined, or silenced. And even if the fire threatened to consume me, I would not let it burn me down. The tension was suffocating. Every day felt like a countdown to something. I didn't know if it was victory or collapse. The weight of expectations, the constant scrutiny, and the relentless attacks gnawed at me from inside out. Mark wasn't just a colleague anymore. He was a symbol of everything wrong in that place. Entitlement without accountability, cruelty disguised as confidence, power wielded like a weapon. The legal investigation was dragging on, a slow-moving beast devouring my energy. Emails piled up, meetings were scheduled, and questions were asked. But action? That was another story. I watched as Mark smiled in meetings, playing the part of the innocent victim, while I became the office pariah. The same people who whispered their support behind closed doors were quick to distance themselves when I walked into a room. It was lonely. One evening, after a brutal day filled with thinly veiled insults and blatant disregard, I sat alone in my apartment. The city lights outside mocked me, a glittering reminder of the life I was fighting to keep. My phone buzzed, a message from HR. Another meeting, another opportunity, or so they said. I prepared meticulously, rehearsing my points, gathering evidence, steeling myself against the inevitable gaslighting. The meeting was tense. The HR reps listened, nodded, but I saw the resistance behind their eyes. They wanted closure, but not conflict. I laid out everything: Mark's harassment, Sarah's sabotage, the toxic culture, my battle for fairness. When I finished, the room was silent. Then came the question I feared most. Are you prepared to accept a settlement? To move on quietly? My heart hammered. I knew the answer. No, I couldn't trade my dignity for silence. The fallout was swift. Mark escalated his campaign. Passive-aggressive emails turned to public accusations. The stress ate at me. My relationships frayed. Rachel tried to be my rock, but even she was worn down. One night, exhausted and overwhelmed, I considered quitting. Walking away seemed easier than this endless war. But something inside me refused to let go. I was fighting for more than just myself now. For the principle. For anyone silenced in the shadows. The breaking point came unexpectedly. During a critical project presentation, Mark interrupted me mid-sentence, mocking my ideas with a cruel smile. I snapped. The room froze. I stood up, looked him in the eye, and said what I'd held back for months. You don't get to undermine me anymore. The silence that followed was heavy, but liberating. I had crossed a line. There was no turning back. The tension in the office had become unbearable. After I finally confronted Mark in front of the team, things shifted, but not how I expected. The silence that followed my words wasn't relief. It was a storm gathering strength. I knew I'd rattled the cage, but the question was whether the beast inside would lash out harder. For days after that meeting, I kept a low profile, but Mark's venomous tactics grew more subtle and insidious. He no longer shouted or openly insulted me. Instead, he manipulated the narrative in whispered conversations, painting me as unstable and aggressive. I could feel the walls closing in, colleagues looking over their shoulders, unsure whether to trust me or the man who'd always seemed untouchable. The legal investigation dragged on, but the company's bureaucracy was like a labyrinth designed to wear people down. Every request for an update was met with vague promises and delays. It was as if they hoped the issue would simply disappear if they ignored it long enough. Meanwhile, my personal life began to unravel. Rachel was supportive, but the constant stress was a heavy burden. I found myself snapping over minor things, losing patience with the people I cared about most. The fight at work consumed my every thought, leaving little room for anything else. One night, exhausted and overwhelmed, I sat alone in my apartment, staring at my reflection in the dark window. The man staring back looked tired, worn down, but determined. I had sacrificed so much, my peace, my health, my relationships, but I wasn't ready to give up yet. The breaking point came when I received a call from the legal department. They had new evidence that could finally tip the scales. Mark's illegal actions, previously dismissed or ignored, were now undeniable. The company was preparing to take decisive action, but with victory so close, the stakes became even higher. Mark's retaliation was swift and merciless. He filed complaints against me, accusing me of creating a hostile work environment. I was summoned to HR yet again, forced to defend myself against charges designed to discredit me. It felt like a cruel twist of fate, being punished for fighting back. But I stood my ground. I refused to be silenced. With the support of my allies and mounting evidence, the company was forced to act. Mark was removed from key projects, his reputation tarnished beyond repair. Sarah's exit had already set a precedent. Now, justice was finally within reach. Yet, as I watched the slow unraveling of the toxic culture around me, I realized this wasn't just a personal victory. It was a statement, a warning to those who abuse power and silence others. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in months, I felt a flicker of hope. The reckoning was near, and I was ready. It was quiet again. Not the kind of quiet that follows chaos, but a calm born of exhaustion and resolution. After months of battle, the war in the office was finally winding down. Mark was no longer the untouchable force who bullied his way through the halls. The evidence had piled too high, and the company had finally been forced to act. He was removed from all key projects, his career forever scarred. Sarah's departure had already shifted the balance, and now, with Mark sidelined, a tentative peace settled over the team. But the scars ran deep, mine included. I sat at my desk one evening, staring at the glow of my laptop screen, thinking about everything that had brought me here. The sleepless nights, the whispered betrayals, the moments when I wanted to give up but couldn't. All of it, every painful second, had shaped me into who I was now. I had fought not just for my own dignity, but for anyone who'd ever been silenced in the name of power. Rachel was there, waiting for me after work. Her presence was a balm to my weary soul. We didn't need words. Our silence spoke volumes. The road to recovery wouldn't be easy. The wounds I carried weren't visible, but no less real. PTSD, anxiety, the weight of broken trust, all things I'd have to confront in the coming days. But I was ready. More than ready, because I had learned something valuable in this fight. That courage isn't the absence of fear. It's the choice to face it anyway. The office would never be perfect. There would always be battles to fight. But now I knew I could stand my ground. For myself, for Rachel, for every quiet warrior out there waiting for their moment to be heard. As I closed my laptop and headed home, I felt a strange sense of peace. Not because the fight was over, but because I had found my voice. And that was enough. Thanks for listening. We'll see you in the next story.